While min-maxers are always searching for the super expensive or inventive Path of Exile builds to entertain themselves with, I think a bunch of good old bread and butter Path of Exile builds are simply underrated and not represented enough in this Siege of the Atlas League. For no good reason, at least among casual players. Hi everyone, this is Gyro, and today I'd like to look at the builds that are undeservingly forgotten by PoE players who all seem to herd around a handful of surely very strong, but also arguably rather boring or expensive builds that we can see on PoE builds.cc right now. I will not take you through this list because what is the point, right? You can do it yourselves in your own time, and those are fantastically put together, very well written guides. And instead I will jump straight into my own countdown and a list of underrated Path of Exile builds you probably could explore as something to try for the remainder of 317 League as a little project, and maybe even as a starter for the next league. So jumping straight into this underrated build, number 5 in my countdown list is Spark Inquisitor Tank that I previewed rather recently. Definitely not the cheapest build and maybe not the most straightforward one, which doesn't make it a very comfortable league starter, explaining why it is at the bottom of this underrated list. But definitely not something completely unreachable for casuals, and you can put this build together solo, maybe with some purchases made on the community market, which is not an issue. I have a guide on how to buy things from the Path of Exile community market in case you get lost with those kind of things. I've already previewed this build like I just mentioned, and I'll link the video in the description, but I could strongly recommend it to someone who wanted to face tank bosses of Path of Exile on a budget, and who didn't want to make yet another Arc Witch or Poisonous Concoction Pathfinder. Underrated build number 4 in this countdown is General's Cry Shield Crush Berserker. While shield skills have gotten a little nerfed in 317 Siege of the Atlas League, my brief background test suggested that the build is far from being dead, and is a lot of fun to play while being very tanky as well. So I simply think it's underrated and deserves more attention of Path of Exile players who might be a bit bored with some more trivial and over-popular build choices, like yet another Witch Summoner build maybe. Here you have a gameplay that's similar to Summoner or Minion build without it actually being a Minion build. Weaker point of this build that should be mentioned is the slow start. Until you get General's Cry skill and level up your Shield Crush a bit before you can start feeling powerful actually. But I still believe that this build is absolutely fun and deserves your attention. Underrated build number 3 in my list is Freezing Pulse Totems Templar and generally totemic Templar builds such as Holy Flame Totem. So Spell Totem got nerfed in 317, but as with General's Cry and the other shield skills that also got nerfed, that doesn't mean that any Spell Totem based builds are flat out dead, especially if scraping the high end of tier 16 maps is not your ultimate goal at this stage. Apparently, I pronounced the word Hierophant wrong, so bear with me and forgive me for that, but I believe that totemic Templar Hierophant builds are just too good by definition to be ignored. Especially if we're talking about something like Freezing Pulse totems that have just too many benefits to ignore, such as proactive defensive layers that are freezing the enemies around you among also damaging them and not letting them reach you, which I'm sure you would agree is always welcome. The honorable mention here also goes to Holy Flame Totem Templar builds, Hierophant builds that don't even rely on Spell Totem support gem and have not been actually nerfed. So Holy Flame Totem build is just as alive as, in my opinion, Freezing Pulse Totem, or maybe arguably would even pump out a little bit more damage at the expense of offering a little fewer defensive layers. But this is up to you. I genuinely advocate for Templar Hierophant totemic builds in this video. Underrated build number 2 is Ancestral Warchief Chieftain. I simply can't believe that not many people appear to play this build in 3.17, as I think it competes for the name of the best boss killer builds still in the game, at least up to the early end game that I've tested it up so far to myself. The theme of 3.17 that we already discussed plentifully is that a lot of totemic builds got nerfed, but something that is a direct totem by itself rather than totem by proxy of a spell totem gem has not been hit as badly by the nerf bat as some of you might assume. Plus, you get Ancestral Warchief gem very early in the game, which makes this build a potential very interesting league starter, or a rather relaxed mid-league diversification into a build that's been inconveniently forgotten by many. Finishing this list, underrated build number 1 is, in my opinion, Spectral Shield Throw Gladiator. A little nerfed, like all of the other shield-based builds in 3.17, this one is definitely underrated since a ton of damage in this build comes not from the direct shield hit, but from the bleeds spread out by the shield as it bounces through the enemies. And if you combine that with a very fun shield charge movement, extreme tankiness even in budget configurations, I just can't recommend this build enough. I think my own expectations of just how nerfed this build would become in 3.17 have been a little on a defensive side and a little exaggerated, and everything points at the fact that this build is still being very alive and well, undeservingly forgotten this league. And this concludes my list of 5 underrated Path of Exile builds in 3.17 Siege of the Atlas League, my friends. I will leave the links to the build guides and previews in the description of the video. Not all of them have been updated by me to 3.17, but if you take your builds somewhat seriously, firstly, try and get a copy of Path of Building tool if you're on PC, so that you can import the paste bins from me, and let it convert the paste bin import into 3.17. It usually does a pretty good job at doing that, and should let you follow along quite nicely, especially if you watch the video and my supporting explanations, which a lot of people omit unfortunately and then complain to me that my POBs are not complete. Well, they are not. You need to watch the video, my friend. Secondly, if you absolutely love a certain build and play on consoles, not having access to Path of Building tool, just please let me know in the comments below the video and I will consider making a particular build from this list in 3.17, supporting it with the screenshots that will definitely help you out. For any usually unavoidable updates related to this list of underrated builds, including those builds that I might have forgotten, or corrections of something that I've reflected wrongly, and any other additions, as always, please first check the description of the video and then the pinned top comment from me, which I typically add if there are some really important callouts to be made. I sincerely hope that you've enjoyed this video from me. Don't be shy and like it if you did, and subscribe for more Path of Exile content, as while I explore other games during the relatively boring mid-league phase of the game, I still identify as mainly PoE player and will be working on more Path of Exile content going forward. That is in case you started getting a little worried, my friend. So thank you for watching today, and bye for now.